Everybody, please say hello to David McWilliams.
Hi.
Nice to see you, man. Thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
So tell me, are you enjoying it?
I'm loving it here.
You're loving it?
Yeah, this is quite a place. You know,
Is this your first time?
First time in Ireland, yeah,
Excellent.
for sure. I mean, I've listened to a lot of U2 records. I thought that counted, but it doesn't.
No,
actually.
it doesn't. Counts for nothing.
Not at all.
No, you have
Yeah.
to get over the U2 thing to discover us, you know?
I like the Pogues.
Yeah, well,
I like
there
the
you
Pogues.
go.
I can handle that. You actually had a job working in Toronto.
I was probably the worst barman in Toronto.
Yeah, see, before you were this fancy economist trying to save Ireland.
I was a barman. No, what happened was most Irish students, particularly in the late 80s, there was nothing going on here at all.
Mm-hmm.
So loads of us went to Canada, mainly to America, but I went to Canada. And like all interviews, you know, in an interview you spoof away, and the guy said, "Can you bartend?" I said, absolutely.
I'm Irish.
I'm Irish, yeah. So I said, fine, and the first day, and you're only 18 or 19, and you're, you know, classically spoofing well above your station. So I go into the bar, and I look at these things called cocktails that I'd never seen in my life. Because Irish people, we don't drink cocktails. And we certainly didn't drink them back in 1987, 88.
You drank beer.
We drank beer. It was whiskey or beer, right? And because my granny had a bar, so I just knew this was the thing, is vodka, whiskey and beer, whatever. So I look at these things, cocktails, and the first guy comes in, orders, and you know, first order you've got to be the man. And he said, can I have a Blue Jay, please? Right? Named after the baseball team.
Right.
So I knew nothing about cocktails or baseball, right?
And that was 1987?
That was 87, and they were really good.
The Blue Jays were on their way up.
So I'm sitting there thinking, and luckily what they had was a little book under the desk, right, of cocktails. I said, absolutely, sir, no problem at all. You're looking, and you're blue, this and the thing. So we got away with it.
For a while, anyway.
For a while, yeah.
And,
the odd thing was that it was a restaurant run by Chinese people. So you had a Chinese restaurant with an Irish barman who knew nothing about pretending bars. So, you know, but it worked. It worked, and it was really great. I mean,
but
Toronto then was fantastic.
Well, Ireland then was very different. Dublin then was very different versus right now.
Yeah.
Whenever you talk about the economy now, you're front and center in this. There's a lot of talk about Lisbon and what's going on with Ireland's place in Europe.
Yeah.
You're vocally against this.
I know. Again, no.
NAMA, right?
The NAMA thing, yeah. But Lisbon, I think we should vote yes for.
So, I mean, what happened in Ireland to get to this place where the economy is such a story?
Basically, what happened here was that there was, I think, something like a coup d'etat between the banks and the developers. And the government not only looked on, but they actually inflated the thing. They cheerleaded the thing. And this was going on, I think people in the audience will agree, for, 6 or 7 years, crazily, really, really crazily. And you don't have to have a degree in economics or anything to figure out something's going to happen. And if you have a nation that has put all their bets on their credit card to buy houses which are worth half or 1/3 of what they were paying for the peak, you're going to have a crash. And when you have a crash, the banks go bust. And that's exactly what's happening now. I was saying this, screaming like John the Baptist in the wilderness for about 5 years. Eventually, I was actually thinking, maybe I should actually change my tune. But because it did strike me, because I'd worked before I came back home, I'd worked in a lot of these emerging markets all around the world where you see the same carry on. And in fact, in Canada, you had the reason the Canadian banks now are in very good shape is you had the same boom-bust crash in the 80s in Toronto. And after that, the Canadians said, never again. So Canadian banks are in good shape now. So
regulations came in. The government
regulation came in,
protect
and we did the opposite. We did the opposite. We said, "Is that regulation stuff? We can trust the bankers." And well, there's the reaction. And and ultimately, what happened was, and then the bankers got very, very close to the government, and every single piece of regulation that could ever have protected the consumer, not so much evaporated, was gradually chipped away. And then we had this thing where we ended up borrowing money from Germany to buy houses in Ireland, and we've got to pay back the money to Germany. And this is where we stand. So it's a classic case of people thinking that they can get rich indefinitely by buying and selling expensive houses to each other with other people's money.
Well, the reason,
and that's where we are.
Well, the value has changed so much. There are an enormous amount of young people who felt the pressure to get into the housing market, who now have homes that will never ever be worth what they're going to have to pay.
This is what made me angry at the time, really angry. This isn't about economics. This is about us. This is about our society and how we treat. What you had was a massive transfer of wealth from those young people to developers. And if you think about it, this NAMA has come out, okay, 54 billion euros.
Tell me what NAMA is.
Well, I'll just say, NAMA is a financial Frankenstein that has been invented somewhere to basically give us, the Irish people, the bill for the greed, not only of the bankers, but only 2,000 developers.
It's called asset management,
You
isn't
have
it?
this situation where our generation, the next generation, and the generation coming are going to be mortgaged to protect the interests of 2,000 people. That's all it is. It's only, you see the names, they've been published. There's 2,000 names. There is 9 builders in Ireland. Think about this, 9 builders in Ireland, only 9, used more than 70 billion of debt. I mean, this is crazy. So you can see when I say a coup d'etat, it really was. And what has happened now, the state has decided that the best way forward is to give us the bill for their mistakes. And that just doesn't wash. I don't think anyone buys it.
But how do you do anything about it? Because these are the same people who are in control. There's been some changeover in leadership in this country, but you have a lot of the same people.
No, we had the guy who was the Minister of Finance during the boom is now the boss.
Is now the boss,
So
yeah.
that's the change.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of lads who like bicycle lanes in beside him.
Right.
Okay.
But they're all still there, though.
And they're all still there, and they're like rabbits in the headlines. And when they're asked any difficult question, what they say is, as Mrs. Thatcher used to say, there is no alternative. They say it's the only game in town. So you say, well, mate, what has happened? It's like a hostage situation. That's what it reminds me of, as a kidnapper and a hostage. And they've a gun to our head, and we're the hostage. And the only reason, and we're not talking about the rights and wrongs of the kidnapping, we're negotiating now over the ransom. So the debate in Ireland is, should we pay 50 billion? Should we pay 40 billion? Rather than saying, let the banks go bust. That's what happens in all businesses. And if the banks go bust, and if we manage that properly, we will be out of the far side very easily.
But in America, the banks weren't allowed to go bust. In America, the governments, they own half of them in many of the countries around the world. So all the people who are free market conservatives are in very uncomfortable times right now because I know in Canada we have a very conservative prime minister who isn't a false conservative. I think he believes in conservative ideals, but conservative ideals aren't working in terms of letting companies go bust because it's not a free market.
It's very simple. In Ireland, we have a situation that they're capitalists when they're making a fortune, and they're communists when they start losing money. So it's hilarious, So what we have is we've got basically socialism for the rich, right? So all the last 4 or 5 years it was the market and this, and don't be listening to the likes of McWilliams. So we don't need regulation and trust us, we're fine, right? And now they're flicking through Karl Marx, saying on page 102 of Das Kapital, he says, can we have a few quid, please? Thank you very much. Because you see, that capitalism thing, that wasn't us, that was your man.
That's right.
And what they've done in great Irish fashion is they fired the top guys, but they haven't fired them. They've allowed them retire. And you know what? The lad who was next in line has got the job. Right. So there's no regime change at all. So I think that this is a complete scam being perpetrated on the people and being argued through a combination of bad economics, but most importantly, terror, saying, if you don't do this, our economy will implode. So it's back to the kidnapping situation. We'll pull the trigger if you don't pay the ransom.
All right, stick around because he doesn't just have an idea of what's going on. I think he has a solution too. He thinks he has a solution, and it might involve you if you're watching at home and you're Irish. More with David McWilliams when we come back.
We are a recharging battery for the Irishness of Irish people all over. And if we behave like that, almost like the motherland of this great tribe, they in turn will give us their ideas, their money, their access to markets.
We're back here on the air, hanging out with David McWilliams. How'd the conference go?
Great.
Yeah.
Went really well. Because the idea behind the conference is I had been, over the years, like if you're traveling around, if you're Irish and you travel around, particularly in North America, you walk into bars and you walk into clubs and you walk to restaurants and the people say, where are you from? You're Irish. And they say, I am too. right? So it's a huge.
Did you believe them, or was it just St. Patrick's Day and everybody said it?
This is the interesting one. In Toronto, it was very strange because it was a certain type of Irish. The first time when I was serving pints to these guys, I had this very strange misapprehension that the Canadian Mountain Police always were on horses. Because when you're a kid, that's what you see, the fellas with the funny hats, right? Yeah. So these two lads come in with Canadian Mountain Police, but they were in cars, which was very deflating, actually, for a child. It's very disconcerting, you know.
We view it like leprechauns. I saw no leprechauns here.
It's like all that stuff, you know. Yeah. As you get older, all these little myths begin. So the Canadian Mountain Police actually didn't have horses, was very upsetting. And the other thing, they did a terrible habit of putting their guns on the bar and ordering a drink, which again is very disconcerting. You know, because our cops don't have guns, right? Yeah. And you don't know how to make cocktails, right? So you're sitting there, and the two coppers come in, and this is about fourth or fifth day, and they were very, very, and they said, you're Irish, and blah, blah, blah. They said, so are we, and blah, blah, blah. And he turned around to me after a couple of drinks, which is, obviously cops drank then, which is a very, you know.
With their guns on the table.
With their guns and their cars outside.
I don't think we allow that anymore.
He said to me at one stage, he said, we were chatting about Irish, but he said there was a time when your type of Irish didn't get work here in Toronto. And he was referring to the fact that the first Orange March I ever saw was in Toronto, on Yonge Street, which is really, really odd. You think this is vaguely familiar, but it shouldn't be here. You know, it's all wrong. But so you have this idea that countries like Canada and America are the echo of the immigrants who came here, who came to these places. And the Irish resource is enormous, and they really feel part of our story. They want to be part of the story. So I always looked at what, for example, the Israelis had done with the Jewish population outside. What they did was they created networks and they created contacts so that Israel was constantly supported by, financially and diplomatically and politically, by Jewish people outside. And it struck me a couple of years ago that we should do something similar with the Irish, because they want to be involved, and they're very successful in America. And you know, I remember an Israeli asked me, he says, what do you do with your tribe outside? I mean, you've got the best tribe, you've got the best network. And I said, I don't know, we ripped them off in Bunratty Castle or something, you know. Do you know what I mean? And so then I think it takes a little change in the mind to say, we are a recharging battery for the Irishness of Irish people all over. And if we behave like that, almost like the motherland of this great tribe, they in turn will give us their ideas, their money, their access to markets, etc. So basically what you're doing is you're taking 70 million people, and it won't be 70 million, it could only be 3 or 4 who are really active. But so I said to the government, why don't we look for the top chief executives around the Irish community, all around the world, bring them back home, call it home, okay, and say, we would like you to help us to help ourselves.
Is that the only way to get out of this mess?
It's not the only way, but you've got to think. Everybody's trying to get out of this mess, right? There's a lot of countries in a similar situation. We're rather more delinquent than others, okay? But you've got to think, what do we have that's unique that other people don't have? And this is one of the things that comes screaming out at you, that there is a tribe out there. They are vested in Ireland. They do want to help. They do want to be part of the story. And what we've got to do is just open the door and let them in. So what happened this weekend, like for example, you know, yesterday, one guy who runs an Irish-American guy, runs a big pharmaceutical plant in Kentucky. He said, well, I'm going to start, he said this yesterday, he said, I'm going to employ 400 Irish graduates in the next 3 weeks. If I'm going to go out and find them, I'm going to get a headhunter. So if we make small incremental steps like that, we will solve the solution. We've just got to be a little bit cleverer than the average. And this is an obvious thing, George.
Is there an appetite for that? Because the kind of concerted effort that is required to do that is remarkable. Do you think there is an appetite? I know people want to do it, but you don't want them to. They got to actually go and do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're good talkers, right? As Samuel Beckett was asked, if he hadn't left Ireland, what would his career and his life as a writer have been? And he said, well, I'd have talked about a lot of plays, right? So look, I'm aware of our idiosyncratic ability to chat and natter and postpone and prevaricate, you know? I mean, the Spaniards say mañana. We don't say amorc, but we could easily say amorc.
Right.
There is yeah. But just don't make that call, because it's kind of, you know. So we do have to, in a way, learn from the Irish in Canada, the Irish in America, who are much more can-do people. And in a way, it's very interesting when you bring those people from the States and from Canada to Ireland, suddenly the Irish realised that you can't prevaricate. If there's an idea, you've got to act on it. So in a way, we're shaming ourselves
into doing something
by looking at the way our cousins do things, right?
Nice.
It's like a family wedding, you know? The posh cousins have arrived.
Yes.
And everyone spruces up.
David McWilliams, everybody, great to see you.
Cheers,
Man. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.